You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio. Parasearch Radio, broadcasting to the UK and beyond.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch Radio.
Good evening, and welcome to another fact-filled and spooky central episode of Haunted Histories with me, your historical hostess, Penny G. Morgan, here only on Parasearch Radio. Last week, we looked at Drakelow Tunnels near Kidderminster. I haven't had any of your experiences of that place sent through to me as of yet, but I'm sure there are lots of you out there, so don't be shy. Let me know what's happened to you in all of these places, and you'll get a shout out on the show, and you never know, you might even get asked back to be a guest. This week, we're popping across the pond to Pennsylvania, and more specifically, the area of Gettysburg. So you can probably guess what we're going to be talking about. The famous battle which happened there in July of 1863 as part of the American Civil War. But fear not, it's not going to just be me talking to you for the next 50 minutes or so. I'm going to be joined by a local expert and tour guide, Cheryl Szewczyk, who will be able to tell you all about her experiences and her passion as a Civil War enthusiast. But before we start, and when I introduce Cheryl to you, let's talk about my very, very brief knowledge of the American Civil War. Well, the war itself ran from 1861 to 1865 and was comprised of two sides, the Confederates and the Union. The whole prelude to this war was down to good old honest Abe, Abraham Lincoln to you and me, because he wanted there to be an abolition of slavery, which many of the southern states of the United States took umbrage to. They disliked this because they felt that it was an us and them situation, to put it mildly. The southern states felt very different to the old Yankees up north and chose secession. There were 7 states who seceded before Lincoln came to power in 1861, and these were South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana and Texas, and a further 4 after Lincoln took up office: Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee and North Carolina. It's interesting to point out as well that the assassin of Abraham Lincoln in 1865 was actually by a Southern sympathizer, John Wilkes Booth. You've probably heard the name. The Confederate States raised their own army and had their own body of governance, led by Jefferson Davis, who was known as their president, and who had actually been the senator for Mississippi, among other things. So that's a very short history of it, very, very short history of it. And without much further ado, let me introduce my guest and today's co-presenter, Cheryl Szewczyk. Hi, Cheryl.
Hello.
Hi. Well, thank you for joining us. I know it's morning where you are and evening where we are across the pond. But first things first, us in the UK, we probably don't know as much as you guys would about the American Civil War, unless you do American history when you're at school. How did you get into being a Civil War sort of, I suppose, enthusiast, for want of a better word?
Well, I am an Army veteran.
Right.
But when I was in the Army Reserves, I heard many of my fellow soldiers talking about this really wonderful place called Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. They would talk about how they really liked it down here and how beautiful it was, and they were just going on and on about it. And that got me into thinking, might be a good idea for me to take a trip down there for the weekend or so.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of months after that, I decided to take a trip down to Gettysburg, which was at one time 3.5 hours from my house at the time.
Right.
And when I came down here, it was such an amazing, beautiful little town, different than from where I originally come from. Mm-hmm. And the history down here is so unimaginable. It's wonderful here. Mm-hmm. And the people down here are really nice too. And so I kind of got involved that way.
Right.
Because I lived in New Jersey, which is right next door to New York City. So I was about half hour from New York City at the time. Uh-huh. And, well, in 2003, I got a job working in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. So I had to move from New Jersey to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And I found out I'm only 35 miles north of Gettysburg. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to do all these tours, go on a battlefield. I lived in Harrisburg for about good 3.5 years. Then I decided that I was going to purchase a home down here in Gettysburg.
Oh, so you do actually live in Gettysburg then?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes. So I've been down here for 10 years.
Wow. And it feels like home?
Yes. Actually, I like to say I really was into the spirits first before I was into the Civil War. And you have to really know your history before you get into the spiritual world over here.
Yeah.
Because when I present my tours, I like to present history. That kind of sets the customers up for what they're going to hear.
Yeah.
So, I like to say that the spirits brought me down here.
Do you believe it could have been a past life thing? That maybe you did live there in a past life?
You're not the first person that told me this. Yes. I actually had a psychic medium tell me this too.
Right, because that was that's the sort of the vibe I was getting as you were talking, that you'd obviously lived there at some point and had something very positive had happened to you there, which is why you were being drawn back. That's amazing. That's amazing. So how long did it take you to get your knowledge of the Battle of Gettysburg and the Civil War as good as it is now to be a tour guide?
Truthfully, I'm still learning as I'm going along.
Oh, I like that. That's the right answer.
Thank you.
You can never know everything. Even the experts, like, the scholars and stuff who teach it, you can't know everything about a period of history. It's impossible. So, what before we start talking about what you do on your tours and all that kind of thing, to us in the UK, most people have heard of Gettysburg and the Battle of Gettysburg, but I'll be honest, I didn't even know it was part of the Civil War until I started looking into it, because I sometimes get the War of Independence and the Civil War mixed up in my head. I'll be honest. Okay. But why is Gettysburg such a famous series of battles? Why is it seen to be sort of like one of the iconic battles associated with the Civil War?
Well, it was one of the very first battles that was fought in Northern Territory.
Right.
A lot of people don't know, especially a lot of people over in the United States also don't know that there was another battle fought prior to the Battle of Gettysburg on Northern Territory.
Right.
And that is the Battle of Hanover that took place in late June of 1863.
Right.
Days prior to the actual Battle of Gettysburg itself. Well, when the Battle of Gettysburg started, you had over 160,000 plus men from both Union and Confederate sides emerging on this town, doing nothing but wanting to shoot and kill each other. Mm. Now, that resulted in about 51,000 dead or dying soldiers.
Wow.
And because of that, that is the bloodiest battle of the Civil War.
Right.
That's the significance about it. And another main factor is that the Union soldiers, which was the North soldiers, they actually wound up winning the battle.
Yeah.
And
wasn't that one of the first times that General Lee had been beaten or something?
I think that was his one of his biggest mistakes, because he really was not listening to his generals at the time. And about a month and a half prior to that, he wound up losing one of his best generals, and that is General Stonewall Jackson.
Oh yes, I've heard of him. Yep.
Yes, killed at the Battle of Chancellorsville.
Right.
So he was General Lee's right-hand man.
Right.
So I think the Confederacy kind of lost control when they lost General Jackson. So,
Okay.
yes.
So, I mean, you mentioned about, 160,000 troops descended on Gettysburg that only had a population of about 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 people?
About 2,500.
Oh, about 2,500. Okay. How did this battle actually impact on the residents? What kind of changes did it make to their lives?
Well, let's put it this way. You had 2,500 residents here in Gettysburg. Gettysburg itself was a booming town. You had a lot of doctors, your lawyers. You had a marketplace. You had a lot of places who would build carriages. And they were just really getting into the railroad system, so they did have a railroad coming to Gettysburg, but it didn't get completed until after the war itself. So it was a little booming town. You had churches, schools, everybody running their normal life here.
Right. And I guess these battles coming in just stopped that.
Yes. See, what happened was when the Union and Confederate soldiers emerged on Gettysburg, the civilians had two choices. You could either pack up your bags and leave town, which really was the good choice, because if you decided to stay back, you were risking being captured, killed, or injured.
Right.
Now, some residents in Gettysburg were actually captured and brought to Civil War prison camps.
Right.
And they were not released until after the war itself.
So those Civil War prison camps, would they be Union camps and Confederate camps, or were they just one?
You had your Confederate camps in the South and your Union camps in the North.
So you would be, if a Union soldier thought you were a Confederate sympathizer, you'd be taken to a Union camp.
That's correct.
Wow. Okay. And do they know roughly how many people this happened to in Gettysburg, like civilians?
Oh, I'm not quite sure about that number.
Right.
It wasn't too many.
It wasn't that many. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Now,
I mean, you would have thought Gettysburg being in the north, because Philadelphia would have been classed as north, wouldn't it? There'd have been more Union sympathizers than Confederate. Or did it not work like that?
So. Well, here's what happened. Gettysburg is just about 8 miles north of the Mason-Dixon line, which is the line dividing the North and the South.
Is it really? Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes. And, well, you did have some civilians who lived in Gettysburg who went to fight for the Union, or for the Confederate Army.
Okay.
And that was considered to be a slap in the face, because you're living on Union territory and you're going to fight for the enemy.
Yeah.
One civilian in particular, his name was Private Wesley Culp, who grew up in Gettysburg but wound up moving to Virginia because he had taken up a job down there. And when the war broke out, he wound up joining the army of the Confederacy. So,
right.
And then John Culp, who wound up fighting for the Union soldiers.
Right. Wow.
So, in this war, you had brother against brother.
Yeah.
Father against son. So it kind of broke up a lot of families in a way.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. It's sad, isn't it? Really sad.
Yes.
I also know from sort of just my sort of knowledge of history in the 1800s, there would have been a lot of makeshift hospitals set up in these areas. Was Gettysburg any different?
Oh, Gettysburg was a all the homes, all the businesses, all your barns, all of the sheds, all of the schools, all the churches, and even the county courthouse wound up becoming the site of a makeshift Civil War hospital.
Really?
Yes. Now, you had 51,000 dead or dying soldiers. Let's put it this way. If you are familiar with Civil War surgery, it wasn't very sanitary at the time.
Yep.
The Civil War surgeon will take their bloody hacksaw, perform an amputation on a soldier.
Without anesthetic?
They did have more chloroform and ether, more so than we know of.
Oh, right, okay.
So that whole story about biting the bullet, that was pretty much made up by Hollywood.
Ah, okay.
So, well, they would take their bloody saw, do an amputation on the soldier, sew that soldier back up, throw the amputated arm or leg out the window or out the door. Move on to your next soldier with the same bloody tool. Now, a lot of your soldiers did not die of bullet wounds, they died of diseases.
Infection and things.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I do remember when I did actually study the history of medicine at school as part of my sort of senior education, and I do remember learning about battlefield amputations and things like that, it wasn't actually the injuries that killed them, it was the lack of as we would know it now, antibiotics, but the lack of infection control. But then again, you look at the circumstances these surgeons were working in, and they were doing the best they could, really, with the tools they had at the time. So, are any of these places that were makeshift hospitals still? Are any of them part of the tour? Tell us about your tour, actually. What tours do you do in Gettysburg, Cheryl?
Well, I do a walking tour, and I also do a haunted pub crawl.
All right.
Yes.
So seeing the spirits in more ways more ways than one.
Oh, I get funny. I get more funnier the more the customers drink. So.
That's not like when I used to work in St. Louis, and people used to think there was something wrong with me because I'd like a glass of vodka in an evening. My drink was vodka, and they thought there was something wrong with me drinking vodka in St. Louis.
Oh, no, there's nothing wrong with that. No.
Oh, you're my kind of girl, Cheryl.
Thank you.
So, you do the tours. Do you tour any of the old hospitals that would have been makeshift hospitals?
Well, I talk about...
Sorry about that. You might have noticed there was a bit of a gap in our interview then. We just had a bit of a problem with Skype. It decided to shut down on us. But I was talking to Cheryl in Pennsylvania, about the makeshift hospitals that were there during the Civil War and the Battle of Gettysburg. And I was asking her if she visited any of them, or if any of them are able to be visited, even for their paranormal investigation, as in Gettysburg, that were known to be hospitals during the war. Cheryl?
Yes.
Yeah. So are there any hospitals that we can still visit, or that you visit on the tours, or that people can go and do investigations at if they're in the area?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, wonderful.
There is one place that is called the Farnsworth House.
Mhm.
Now, during the battle itself, that was the house that was occupied by Confederate soldiers. They were the
Right.
South soldiers. Now, like I said, you had two choices. You could either pack up and leave town or come back when the battle was over with.
Mhm.
But for the people who did not have the luxury of transportation, would actually have to wind up hiding out in their basement.
Right.
What happened was the Farnsworth House was here during the time of the battle.
Mhm.
It was a home that was owned by the Sweeney family. The Sweeneys, they decided that they're going to hide out in their basement. Now, directly after the battle, that house became the site of a Civil War hospital.
Right.
Now, they performed the surgeries in the front of the parlor area
Mhm.
on the first floor, and it was so bloody that the blood was dripping through the floorboards and onto the Sweeneys who were hiding out in their basement.
Oh.
Yes.
And obviously the soldiers, they didn't know anyone was down there. The soldiers didn't know they were hiding in their basement.
Most of them didn't. Or if they did, they just left them alone, so.
Right.
They also used the basement of that home as a makeshift morgue.
Right.
Yes.
Wow. And that home is still there. You can visit it. It's not a residential property or anything?
It's a bed and breakfast,
Oh, right.
like a little inn, and it's all there in the back area. They have a nice little restaurant. They have plenty of good stuff there. They have you can take a tour of the home, whether you want a history tour.
Mm.
You could take a ghost tour of the home, or you could do a paranormal investigation of the home as well.
Oh, that sounds intriguing.
Yes,
It does sound
yes,
intriguing.
yes.
Huh. So when you do your you say you do a pub tour, sort of like a
That's
haunted pub,
correct.
paranormal pub crawl or something. What sort of things?
Yes.
Where do you visit? What sort of is its link to that period in history?
Well, what I basically do is I take them to three different popular spots over in Gettysburg.
Mhm.
One place I take them to is a place called Gettysburg Eddies.
Mhm.
And while the building was not here during the time of the battle, but we do have he was kind of like a local celebrity during the 1900s because he was a famous baseball player.
Okay.
And he played baseball from 1900 until about 1917.
Mhm.
But his name was Eddie Plank.
Right.
Eddie Plank grew up in the town of Gettysburg, really much on the outskirts of town. But Eddie's mother was, she lived about 12 miles outside of Gettysburg when the Union and Confederate soldiers came to fight at the battle.
Right.
In which that battle was so big that they actually had little skirmishes out in the town where she lived at also,
Wow.
which is called Hunterstown, Pennsylvania.
Right.
So she was there during the time of the battle, and the home that she lived in is still standing till this day.
Wow. Okay.
So his descendants, who still live in and around the town of Gettysburg, wanted to honor him.
Yeah.
And they have a business called Gettysburg Eddies. It's a local restaurant, a bar. Many good things happen there. So, and as a matter of fact, on my very first pub crawl, that's my very first stop.
Mm-hmm.
Myself and my coworker were facing the bar area,
Mm-hmm.
and we actually saw a menu fly off of one of the tables.
Wow.
And it was by itself. It just went airborne right onto the ground.
Okay. And if they had things like that happen before there?
Yes.
Right.
It's a 2-level restaurant,
Yeah.
and on the second level, the workers have often seen the apparition of a man
Mm-hmm.
on the second floor.
Okay.
Also, the glass rack above the bar, the glasses have been known to fly off of the glass rack.
And I mean, this is going to sound a really stupid question. It's not meant to be. You don't get things like earthquakes and things like that around there that could cause it?
We have gotten earthquakes.
Right.
Not very big ones. As a matter of fact, the last earthquake that was here in town, if you were sitting down, you were able to feel it, but if you were standing up, you were not able to feel it.
Okay, so there wouldn't have been enough of a tremor to actually send glasses flying off a rack or anything?
Oh, that's correct. We were sitting down, so we would, as a matter of fact, about a good 6 weeks ago, I had a pub crawl.
Yeah.
In that very building. And myself and the other guests actually saw one of the glasses turning around as if it was a fan.
Really?
And it was just one glass turning around. We sat and watched that for like 5 minutes before it stopped.
So even though the building itself wasn't there could it be Eddie has come back to try and let people know, it's like almost, work in his bar that's been named in his... Does anyone ever done any investigations there to try and find out who it is?
Not in that building, because it's a restaurant. I don't think they allow investigations in that building. But the house that Eddie grew up in,
yeah,
he has been known to haunt that house.
Right.
So we really don't know if it's Eddie himself. Now, also, let's not forget, it's not the building. Sometimes it's the ground that's haunted.
Yep.
You build a building on haunted ground, you're going to get spirit activity.
That was going to be my next question. Do we know what the ground underneath the building was used for?
I am not sure.
Wonder if it was someone died there, or, who was in the battle or something, as you say, because it's not necessarily the building that can have spirits resonating still through it. It could be the actual ground, or even one of the objects that's in the building that was an antique. It could be attached to. Fascinating.
Could be.
Fascinating.
Could be.
All right, we're going to take a short 30-second break there, and then we'll come back in the second half, and we're going to talk a bit more about Cheryl's tours and some of the paranormal experiences that she's had, because I want to hear more about this. And I'm also going to talk about a myth about shoes that I read about with the Civil War and the Battle of Gettysburg. But don't go anywhere.
Hello, Harry Price here. Good evening. If there's nothing myself and everybody else enjoy here on the other side more is the sit back and relax and listen to Parasearch Radio with its paranormal news, views and reviews from across the UK and beyond. Make sure to find out more about them on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web, whatever they are, to keep up to date with all their broadcasts throughout the week. And I hope you enjoy them as much as we do over here. Hello? Is anybody there?
Okay, and we're back. Thank you for staying with us. Now, I'm talking to the lovely Cheryl Szewczyk, who lives in Gettysburg in Pennsylvania and runs tours, not just historical tours, but she also does a pub crawl tour, which we were just talking about, and we were talking about something called Gettysburg Eddies, which sounds like it's somewhere that you should go and visit if you're ever in the town. So we're talking about the pub tours. We're looking back at the history of the Civil War. There are some names for a British person like myself that I would recognise. Ulysses S. Grant, who was, I believe, the 18th US president or something like that.
That's correct.
General Robert E. Lee. Well, I'm not meaning to downplay your history, but we always think of the General Lee, Dukes of Hazzard.
Yes.
Can't help it. I grew up on it.
Yes.
And that was how I learned about the Confederates and the Confederacy flag, the flag that's on the top of the General Lee. And then also William, was it Tecumseh Sherman, whose name was given to the Sherman tank. So there are some quite famous legacies from the Civil War that some, I mean, you know, over here we might not know because we don't study American history to obviously to the extent that you would in your schools. But some of the, the battlegrounds I was reading about, things like McPherson's Ridge, Oak Hill, Devil's Den, are they all still accessible to be visited, or have some of them been developed over?
Oh, they are still accessible. Devil's Den is one of the most haunted spots on the Battle of Gettysburg.
Is it?
Yes.
Is that part of your tour then, when you do your tours?
No, ghost tours are not allowed on the battlefield because
Really?
we're organized tours, yeah. But you, the civilian, could go and walk the battlefield and take pictures and have a good time. Some people have picnics on the battlefield, and they also have like bus tours that you could take.
Right.
And they also have horseback riding tours.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes.
So what kind
And
of experiences have you heard about then on somewhere like, you say Devil's Den's they're meant to be the one with the most paranormal activity. What kind of things have you heard happening? Or have you experienced?
Well, before the invention of the digital camera, a lot of people will go to Devil's Den and take pictures there, of course. Now, it is not unusual to see people dressed up as either a Union or a Confederate soldier walking the battlefield. We have them on the battlefield all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes they have the ladies in their long gowns walking as well. But the one story about Devil's Den, before digital camera come along, people used to see a man dressed in a Union uniform.
And what did the Union uniform look like, just for us?
It was like dark blue pants and a dark blue like frock coat.
Okay.
And they had like a dark blue like a baseball cap. And they would see these soldiers just hanging around the area, so they went up and they actually wanted to take a picture with him. Now, this is the time where you would take your picture and then you would have to take your photos to be developed. Many times people will get their photos developed and notice that there is no longer a man standing in their picture.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that has happened a lot of times.
Right.
As a matter of fact, yesterday morning I like to walk the battlefield during the morning, especially around Devil's Den, because many times people have told me, like around 6 o'clock in the morning, that they would see the apparition of a soldier in that area. So, of course, I would have to be there.
Of course, yeah. Okay,
Yes.
I get that, yeah.
Turns out yesterday I had this really this real eerie feeling as I parked my car and I got out and I'm walking around and I just don't hang around there. I go to the other places as well. But when I'm finishing my walk, I'm walking towards Devil's Den, and I see like a dark shadow hovering around it.
Mm.
And looked away, and then when I looked back in the same spot, that dark shadow was not there anymore.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
Another experience of mine, I actually saw what looked like a Union soldier fall to the ground one day.
Mhm.
And this Union soldier it looked like he fell straight down. So I park my car, I get out to only realize that there's nobody on the ground. So that's my experience there.
Wow, pretty major. Okay, so
Yes.
you're saying that you're not allowed to do tours, those kind of tours around the battlefields. They have to be specific, I suppose, military sympathetic type tours.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are there any of the other sites? I mean, they've got some. I think some of the names of them are brilliant. I was reading like Seminary Ridge, Little Round Top, Peach Orchard, Trostles Farm. I mean, these are great. Are there any other
Yes.
sort of stories associated with any of those that you could tell us?
Well, there is one of my favorite spots on the battlefield for paranormal hauntings is a place called the Wheat Field.
Right.
Now, now after the battle, being that they were on the Union territory, a lot of your Union soldiers were pretty much taken off the battlefield, especially the dead ones. They were brought to either cemeteries or brought back home and given proper burials.
Mhm.
But the Confederate soldiers was not so lucky.
Right.
A lot of them who died in Gettysburg would actually wound up getting buried in mass graves.
Mhm.
And this place called the Wheat Field actually became the site of one of the mass graves that was a lot of soldiers were buried in.
Crikey. Okay.
And now it took them at least 7 years from the Battle of Gettysburg until about 1870 to finally remove all of the body, well, what they think is all of the bodies from the battlefield itself, and bring them home to give them proper burials.
Wow.
But during that time period, a lot of those graves kind of got lost.
Mm.
So there's anywhere between 1,200 to 1,500 bodies still unaccounted for due to the Battle of Gettysburg.
Wow. That's a lot of unsettled
And
souls. Yeah.
the wheat field itself, they still believe might be the site of a mass grave, but they're not sure.
I mean, you can understand the fact this battle took place in July, and they wouldn't have had the sort of the mortuaries and things like we do now to stop the bodies, for want of a better term, going rotten. You can almost understand
Right.
why they wanted to bury them as fast as possible.
Yes. Yes.
But you know, that's quite a it's a sad sort of state of affair that there's all these, there's families who never knew what happened to their loved one. And I suppose actually a bit like trench warfare in World War One. There was an awful lot of soldiers there that people never knew. They were presumed dead,
Right.
but their bodies were never found, and there's still bodies being found now whenever there's any excavation work done where the former trench lines were. So it's probably a similar state here. Wow.
Oh, yes.
Wow.
Yes.
So are there actually any are there cemeteries in Gettysburg which actually have Civil War soldiers buried in them?
The National Cemetery. It was the first national cemetery in the United States, and they buried Union soldiers in the National Cemetery.
Right.
Now, the National Cemetery is also the place where President Abraham Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address.
Ah, okay.
That was the opening of the cemetery itself.
you mentioned about your tours you do and the places that you visit, and your knowledge on Gettysburg is very obvious. You mentioned, we were talking when we've been talking sort of before we started recording this show. You were saying that you do actually dress up as well,
Yes.
and that you've got
Yes.
an authentic Confederate uniform.
Correct. Well, it's authentic to me, so I mean, but they are very expensive. If you want to purchase a pair of pants, sometimes you have to. It's over $100 here for a pair of trousers.
Really? Well, I was watching.
Yeah.
I was watching online. I don't know if you saw it, and I don't know what your view on it was, because I haven't actually finished watching it all yet, because it only came online a couple of days ago. But the Tennessee Wraith Chasers did an episode recently in Gettysburg of their Haunted Towns
Yes,
series. Did you see it?
I certainly did.
What were your thoughts?
I um I can't disprove it. I mean, especially that place where they did the investigation by that lady's house.
Yeah.
Well, I know exactly where that house is, and that place is pretty creepy over there.
Really? I found it interesting when the bit I was watching when they were in, is it the Mason-Dixon Militaria
Yes,
place? I
yes,
found when they went down into the cellars there, and they had I think it was a child's embalming table down there. I found that
yes,
bit quite.
yes,
I was at, because they were and they've got an outfit of a lady. It's still got the blood on it from.
yes.
So is that place actually a shop or a museum?
It is right now. As a matter of fact, that militaria place, they switched. They went to another building, but there is another shop there. I believe that they're going to be selling Christmas ornaments there. Yeah, but that building is still there.
Right.
It's an incredible building, and as a matter of fact, the lady who owns the farmhouse that they investigated,
Mhm.
I've been to that farmhouse several times. And she occasionally will have like paranormal events there and stuff like that. But I've never investigated. But my very first trip over to that farmhouse, you have a long road going into the driveway before you get to the farm.
Right.
And I'm driving in, and there's a building, like a little shed prior to where you see the farm and stuff. And I'm looking at that building, and I actually see the apparition of a person standing in front of that building.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
and then, prior to me actually learning about the house itself, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the house, and I actually envision the sight of a Civil War surgeon just standing there with his bloody robe on and stuff. I envisioned that before they actually told the story.
So there's still some pretty powerful energies going on around there.
Yes, apparently there are still bodies that are still buried on that property, but they don't know where. It's a big farmland, so.
Well, one of the questions that, as I was doing my research for this, that popped up in my mind, and you may well not be able to explain why this was, is why over so only. I mean, in Gettysburg, the battle there was what, 3 days in total?
Correct. Yes.
But it seemed to be with all these places that I was mentioning, like McPherson's Ridge, Devil's Den, Oak Ridge, all that. It seemed to happen in a lot of different places over a very short space of time. How close together are all these different places, and why was it not just in one big field? Does that make sense?
As a matter of fact, the town itself, the town of Gettysburg, is the battle grounds. I like to say that because not a lot of people that come to town know that.
Right.
They just thought that the soldiers just fought on the battlefield area there, but no, they were not only in Gettysburg, but they also had battles in the surrounding towns as well.
Right.
So, as a matter of fact, the truth is, when the Confederate soldiers attacked Gettysburg, they actually came from the northern part. And the Union soldiers, when they came into Gettysburg, they were coming up from the south. So, yeah,
So was it literally because it was a town that they were converging on? It was as they almost got split up into different bits, and that's where the different battles were? Is that how it...
Basically, yes.
Oh, right, okay.
It was, yeah.
Well, one of the myths I was reading about as I was researching this, and I mentioned it before we had the break, was about shoes. And supposedly the Confederate general, General Heth, said he wanted to go to Gettysburg because he heard he could get shoes there.
Right.
Is that a common rumour about the battle?
My take on that is the shoes that they were issuing the Confederate soldiers at the time were basically made to last about 3 months.
Right.
But the soldiers had to do a lot of walking. They had to do a lot of marching day to day. They didn't have the transportation that they have now. So a lot of their shoes actually wore out. So that's why you had a lot of your soldiers who actually, you see pictures of them not wearing any shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, one of the reasons why they converged on Gettysburg, because they did hear about, there was a big, they had a lot of shoes here.
Okay.
So they could purchase the shoes for their soldiers, but then, yeah, that's the only thing I could partake about that.
The other reason I was reading is it was all actually to do with there's so many roads, access points into Gettysburg, and that was the other reason the area was chosen.
Yes, that is true too. We still have 10 roads or so leading into the town square itself. So.
Okay. So what other? Sorry.
I'm sorry, and the shoes, I had just learned that when they made the shoes, they didn't make for the right foot or the left foot, they just made them regular. Okay. And when the soldiers had them fitted, they actually had to stand in the stream to actually have the shoes fitted to their feet. Yeah.
Interesting. So, yeah, we've talked about some of the hauntings that you know of about. Is it Wheatfields, Devil's Den? You mentioned Gettysburg Eddie's and Eddie Plank's former house that's just outside of Gettysburg.
Yes.
Are there any other sort of hauntings in the area that would people enjoy listening to when you're telling them on your tours that you know of?
Many of them. One place is a place called the Cashtown Inn in Cashtown, Pennsylvania. As a matter of fact, the Cashtown Inn, when it started construction in 1797, it didn't get completed until 1814. Mm-hmm. When it got completed, it was a hotel, a bar, a restaurant, a private home, and there was also a toll booth that sat in front of the building because that roadway in front of the building was a major highway at the time. Mm-hmm. Now, the man who owned the property, he first called it the Old Hotel. Why? Because the town of Cashtown had not gotten its name. And here's how that happened. The man who owned the Old Hotel also ran the toll booth in front of the Old Hotel. And he would not accept anything except for cash to go through the tolls. He wouldn't accept barter, work it off, or credit. Many of the guests that would be traveling to and from Gettysburg were often pulled over, and they were told, hey, you have to have cash for that town. That's how the town got its name, Cashtown.
Okay.
And after that, the Old Hotel became the Cashtown Inn.
Yeah.
Well, in October of 1862, Confederate General Jeb Stuart actually raided the Cashtown Inn because he was given the orders to give General Lee the lay of the land for the Battle of Gettysburg.
Mhm.
It becomes famous again in June of 1863 when the Cashtown Inn becomes the site of the very first casualty and the very first death due to the Battle of Gettysburg, and that man's name is Private George Sandow.
Right.
Now, Private Sandow has been known to haunt the basement of the Cashtown Inn
Oh.
because during the battle, the Cashtown Inn was the site of a Confederate hospital.
Mhm.
They did the surgeries in the basement. Now get this, they did surgeries in one room and baked bread for the soldiers in the next.
Okay.
Yes. But that place right now, it is a bed and breakfast. It's a bar and a restaurant. They have about 7 rooms that you could rent out for the evening.
Yeah.
Guest room number 1, I don't have any information on. But guest room number 2, people will get the sensation of spirits passing through their bodies while they're staying in this guest room.
Okay.
They have often seen the toilet seat move up and down by itself. So the guys wouldn't be in trouble in this room because sometimes the toilet seat moves up and down by itself.
As long as it's being put down rather than put up.
Yes. Guest room number 3, the Major General A.P. Hill room. I don't know, have you ever seen the TV show Ghost Hunters?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, they filmed an episode out of the Cashtown Inn.
Ah, okay. I'll have to look that one up.
And Grant Wilson was staying in guest room number 3.
Mhm.
And while he was sleeping, he was recording. And he actually got the picture frame moving twice.
Okay.
So, guest room number 4, the Major General Harry Heth room. Guests would often feel the sensation of being levitated while they're sleeping.
Okay. He's lifting them up to steal their shoes.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Okay, so this place, the Cashtown Inn, was it called? So that's obviously got a lot
Yes.
of activity. Again, we've got the link to it being a hospital, a makeshift hospital, and quite sort of involved in the whole emotion of battle.
Yes.
Anywhere else?
Oh, another place. Like I said, I like the Farnsworth House. As a matter of fact, the Farnsworth House is a bed and breakfast as well.
Mhm.
One day, a friend of mine and I decided that we were going to feel out the spirits at the Farnsworth House. So we rented one of the rooms out for the evening.
Mhm.
We rented a room out called the Sarah Black Room,
Okay.
which is in the original part of the house. Now, I'm putting my clothes away, and I hear a noise by my door. I turn around, I look at my door, and I actually see the doorknob turning by itself. So, kind of creeped me out. So what do? I go to the door anyway. I answer the door to find nobody was standing behind my door.
Mm.
Yes. Now, I would have seen or heard somebody because that's a very small hallway.
Yeah.
Later on that evening, I see my friend getting ready to go into the bathroom to take her bath. And I actually see the apparition of a person follow her into the bathroom.
Okay.
Later on that evening, I'm laying in bed, I'm all comfortable, I'm all relaxed, until I hear the voice of a lady whisper in my ear asking me to move over.
Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting. It does sound definitely like there's an awful lot of stuff going on here.
Yes.
It sometimes makes me wonder. I mean, I believe in it. I believe in it all, but I'm also I'm a skeptical believer, I call it. I always ask the questions. I always, if someone says they feel a burst of cold air, I'm checking for a vent or an aircon or things before I'll sort of say there is something not quite right here. Which is why when we were talking about the glasses falling off was it Gettysburg Eddies, you mentioned that the glasses had fallen off the shelves. I said about an earth tremor, because, that's one of the first things that an investigator would check. Has there been an earth tremor or something that could have caused it? Has a big lorry or a big vehicle gone past that makes the walls rattle and all that kind of thing? But it always makes me wonder why certain places seem to have more energy surrounding them than others. Is it because of the amount of loss of life? Is it because of the emotion? I don't necessarily mean sort of crying or whatever, but just general emotions that would have been in a place like that. The amount of adrenaline that would have been pumping for everyone, not just the soldiers. Or is it? I just don't know. Or is there something in that land that just holds on to it? It's a fascinating sort of subject, really, to look at. Well, believe it or not, Cheryl, we've been talking for over 55 minutes about Gettysburg. Thank you ever so much for being our guest tonight. I really, really appreciate it. If any of our listeners are getting out to Pennsylvania and to Gettysburg, how would they book on one of your tours?
Haunted Gettysburg Tours. You could just go online. It's called Haunted Gettysburg Tours.
It's called what, sorry?
I'm sorry?
I didn't hear you. Sorry, it broke up then. It's called what? What's the website called?
Haunted Gettysburg Tours.
Haunted Gettysburg Tours, thank you.
That's correct, yes.
And they can just book on that, and they can get to see Gettysburg, well, like the Gettysburg we've been talking about.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Absolutely, yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Well, we'll make sure we put the link to the website in the advert for this show, so anyone who wants to have a look can go on it. But I say thank you ever so much for your time, Cheryl. I really appreciate it, and I've learnt a lot that I didn't know about, and I think I'm going to be looking up more, because you don't really realise quite the effect some of these battles have, because you do picture them to be in a big field and nobody else is involved, whereas, like you say, in this situation it was almost street warfare. And if your house happened to be in the middle, as you say, you either packed your bags and ran, or hid in the basement and hoped for the best.
True. Oh, yes.
Well, next week, I'm going to be chatting to our friends at Fright Nights London about somewhere called the Jeffrey Museum, which is a very interesting place that not many people know about, and also their recent investigation into this actually uninvestigated before then venue. So it should be some interesting experiences there. Don't forget, though, that Parasearch Radio has 6 days a week's worth of shows on pretty much every night, and this Friday at 9 o'clock, the Dark Mirror Show will be talking about ghost ships. So please listen, either live or after, we don't mind. That just leaves me to say good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.